Ever watch a movie that punches you in the face with sheer visual beauty? Hollywood's greatest visual masterpieces aren't the ones playing on Netflix right now. They're buried in film history, forgotten by casual audiences, completely overshadowed by their more famous neighbors. Today, we're excavating 15 jaw-dropping films that prove sometimes the most breathtaking cinema ever made happens when nobody's looking. The Thief of Baghdad, 1940. Michael Powell created a Technicolor fever dream that shouldn't have been possible in 1940. The Thief of Baghdad is pure visual spectacle wrapped in Arabian fantasy, shot entirely on elaborate sound stages in England during wartime. The production design is absolutely insane, with towering sets, intricate miniatures, and revolutionary matte paintings that create impossible kingdoms. Cinematographer Hal Rawson won the Oscar for this, and rightfully so, because every single frame explodes with saturated color and imaginative composition. The plot follows a thief who stumbles into a magical world of flying carpets and enchanted treasures, but honestly, the story is secondary to the visual madness happening on screen. What makes this essential is that Powell achieved epic-scale fantasy on shoestring budgets and studio constraints that would destroy modern filmmakers. The technical innovation was groundbreaking. The color grading pushes Technicolor to its absolute limits, creating blues so vivid they feel surreal, reds so deep they appear to glow. Critics immediately recognized it as a masterpiece, winning multiple Academy Awards, including for special effects. Yet most modern viewers have never heard of it because it's been eclipsed by contemporary fantasy. The film deserves to be remembered as the spiritual ancestor of all fantasy epics, proving that imagination and camera work matter more than expensive CGI. The Red Shoes, 1948. Powell and Pressburger reunited to create possibly the most visually stunning dance film ever made. The Red Shoes tells the tragic story of a young ballet dancer caught between love and artistic ambition, but the real magic happens during a 17-minute ballet sequence that remains absolutely transcendent. Shot in Technicolor by cinematographer Jack Cardiff, this sequence is choreography meets cinematography in perfect harmony. The production design by Hein Heckroth transforms the stage into a dreamscape where reality and fantasy collapse. The ballet sequence alone justifies this film's inclusion on every greatest cinematography list ever created. Cardiff's camera work during the dance is liquid poetry, tracking dancers with impossible grace, capturing movement that feels both theatrical and cinematic. The color palette shifts from vibrant stage lighting to soft romantic tones to harsh dramatic reds. Critics called it a revolution in how dance could be filmed. The production was complex and ambitious, with the dance sequences requiring unprecedented coordination between choreography and camera movement. Modern dancers and cinematographers still study this sequence because it remains unmatched in terms of capturing human movement through film. It's criminally underwatched by casual audiences who think dance films are boring. Nostalgia, 1983. Andrei Tarkovsky made another film on this list, but Nostalgia deserves its own recognition because it represents something different. Shot in Italy with cinematographer Giuseppe Lanzi, Nostalgia is Tarkovsky's most visually accessible work, while maintaining his philosophical complexity. The film follows a Russian writer traveling through Tuscany, exploring themes of memory and displacement through landscape cinematography that feels almost spiritual. The visuals are deliberately slow and meditative, with long takes of Italian countryside, Renaissance architecture, and water. Lanzi's cinematography creates an atmosphere of wistful melancholy through subtle color shifts and deliberate composition. The film moves at a glacial pace that destroys impatient viewers, but those who surrender to it experience something transcendent. The production was complicated by Tarkovsky's exacting demands. Wings of Desire, 1987. Wim Wenders crafted a philosophical masterpiece about angels observing Berlin during the Cold War. Wings of Desire is visually devastating, shot by cinematographer Henri Alecan, who brought decades of experience to Wenders' increasingly experimental vision. The film uses different color palettes for different realms, Angels see the world in sepia and black and white, while humans experience vibrant color. This cinematographic choice creates visual language that expresses the film's thematic concerns without any dialogue needed. Ali Khan's work here is revolutionary because it proves that color itself can become a character in the narrative. The Berlin landscapes, shot partially in color and partially in monochrome, become metaphors for division and isolation. The angel sequences have an ethereal quality achieved through specific lighting and composition choices. Critics immediately recognize this as a masterpiece of visual storytelling. The production was meticulously planned, with every shot composed in advance. Despite critical acclaim and influence on contemporary filmmakers, most casual audiences have never heard of it. This is cinema as philosophy expressed through pure visual language, where cinematography does the heavy lifting that dialogue could never accomplish. The Passion of Joan of Arc, 1928. Carl Theodor Dreyer made a silent film in 1928 that remains visually and emotionally devastating nearly a century later. Joan of Arc, starring Renee Jean Mackie, is shot almost entirely in close-up with minimal set design, forcing the camera to capture raw human emotion and suffering. Cinematographer Rudolf Maté uses stark lighting to create shadows that suggest psychological torment. The film is stripped down and brutal, rejecting ornamental beauty for honest portrayal of anguish. What makes this essential? Dreyer's revolutionary approach to facial cinematography. By forcing extreme close-ups and eliminating distracting backgrounds, Dreyer created visual intensity that modern psychological thrillers attempt but rarely achieve. The contrast between light and shadow becomes almost violent. Maté's work here influenced cinematographers for generations because it proved that simplicity and emotional truth matter more than elaborate production design. Critics call it one of the greatest performances ever captured on film, but it's Maté's cinematography that makes the performance resonate so powerfully. The film was controversial and commercially unsuccessful initially, remaining relatively unknown despite its revolutionary impact. Modern viewers find it devastating because the visual language remains so direct and powerful. Days of Heaven, Elise. 1978. Terrence Malick didn't just make a beautiful movie here, he performed an act of pure visual rebellion. Made in 1978 and shot almost entirely during golden hour across the wheat fields of Alberta, this film is what happens when a director decides to wage war against conventional lighting. The story is deliberately wispy, almost ethereal, following a steelworker who flees Chicago with his girlfriend and sister to hide in the Texas Panhandle. But the plot barely matters. What matters is that Malick and cinematographer Nestor Almendros used only natural light for nearly every scene, crafting something that looks more like paintings by Vermeer than a traditional film. The crew actually rebelled during production. Cameramen thought Malick was insane for refusing studio lights. The producer mortgaged his own house to keep funding the nightmare. It went millions over budget and took 2 years to edit. And for what? A film that barely made money in theaters. But look at it now. It won the Oscar for cinematography, premiered at Cannes, where Malick took Best Director, and it's absolutely considered a masterpiece. The famous locust sequence is apocalyptic horror rendered as terrifying ballet. Every single frame feels stolen from another century. Critics who initially questioned it now call it a transcendent experience that belongs in museums. The cinematography remains untouched as a reference point for natural light achievement. Barry Lyndon, 1975. Stanley Kubrick decided to make a costume drama in 1975, and apparently did it to prove something about lighting nobody else had figured. He literally used modified lenses originally designed for NASA to shoot entire scenes lit by candlelight, replicating exactly how 18th century paintings looked on screen. Barry Lyndon should have been a pretentious snooze. Instead, it's a visual apocalypse that rewrites the rules of cinematography. Kubrick shot this across the lush landscapes of England and Ireland, embracing weather unpredictably, letting rain and wind become part of the visual design. The film adapts Thackeray's picaresque novel following a drifting Irish rogue through 18th century Europe. Every single frame looks like it was composed by a master painter. The symmetry, the color palettes, the way light falls across human faces, it's obsessive to the point of madness. Critics at the time respected it, but didn't quite know what to do with it. This is the kind of film where people watch it frame by frame just to understand what they're seeing, It became Kubrick's most underrated work, completely overshadowed by his later sci-fi epics, but cinematographers still study it like scripture. The technical innovation alone changed how directors thought about natural light. Most people have never heard of it, which remains one of cinema's great tragedies. The Last Emperor, 1987. Bernardo Bertolucci and cinematographer Vittorio Storaro created an absolute visual cathedral with this 1987 epic about China's last emperor, Puyi. This is historical opulence weaponized as pure cinema. The Forbidden City becomes a character itself, bathed in rich golds and deep crimsons, thousands of extras creating compositions that feel orchestrated by some divine hand. Storaro had already proved himself on Apocalypse Now and Reds. The Last Emperor is his most sumptuous collaboration. Every single frame deserves to be hung in a gallery. The film traces Puyi's life from childhood through his role during the Japanese occupation. But what sticks with you is the sheer visual grandeur. The interiors capture the immeasurable wealth of imperial China with such extravagance that it becomes almost surreal. Production designers and costume departments were given complete freedom to transform every location into a living painting. It won the Oscar for cinematography, yet even now, most people haven't seen it. The visuals alone could sustain the entire 3-hour runtime without needing dialogue. Critics call it a sweeping masterpiece, but it's been mostly forgotten by modern audiences, which is ridiculous because Storaro's work here is unmatched. The bold use of color and design makes it feel like watching ancient China through fever dream eyes. Ran, 1985. Akira Kurosawa wasn't done yet when he made this in 1985 at 75 years old. Ran transforms Shakespeare's King Lear into a samurai tragedy so visually explosive it still looks radical today. The cinematography by three legends, Takao Saito, Asakazu Nakai, and Shoji Ueda, created something almost impossibly beautiful. The battles are rendered as savage orchestral violence, all vivid reds and golds and blacks against misty castles and Japanese landscapes. This isn't war realism, it's theatrical annihilation. The story follows an aging warlord who divides his kingdom among his three sons, triggering betrayal and blood. But here's the kicker. You could watch this without hearing a word and understand everything through pure visual language. Kurosawa's compositions achieve a kind of painterly perfection that most filmmakers spend lifetimes chasing and never reach. The blood-red battles explode across the frame with such kinetic ferocity, they become almost beautiful in their brutality. Critics acknowledged its genius, but the slow pacing of the first act deterred many viewers. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the Oscar for cinematography, yet somehow it remains a hidden gem to casual audiences. This is cinema as visual poetry, rendered by a master who proved he could reinvent himself even at an advanced age. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. The title spoils the ending, and somehow director Andrew Dominik didn't care, because he knew this Western's real accomplishment was visual storytelling. Roger Deakins, one of modern cinema's greatest cinematographers, shot this 2007 film with a palette that captures seasonal transformation like no other Western attempted before. Brad Pitt plays Jesse James in his final years, paranoid and dangerous, mentoring a younger gang member, Robert Ford, who harbors dark resentments. What makes this essential is that it's a complete masterclass in cinematography as narrative. The autumn landscapes of the American Midwest transition into harsh winters, and this visual progression becomes the emotional spine of the film. Long shots of isolated figures against vast landscapes create overwhelming loneliness. Deakins uses muted colors and understated lighting to suggest authenticity, even though every frame is meticulously composed. Reddit users consistently rank this as one of the most beautiful movies ever made, calling it honest and exceptional in every way. Critics praise the cinematography relentlessly, yet it barely broke even at the box office and remains mostly unknown to casual audiences. This is the kind of film where each shot could be a photograph. It demands to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. David Lean's 1962 epic didn't just shoot a movie, it transcended cinema into pure spectacle. Shot on Super Panavision 70 across massive desert landscapes, Cinematographer Freddie Young created something so vast and overwhelming that watching it at home is almost criminal. The film follows T.E. Lawrence, a British officer whose exploits in the Arabian desert during World War I blur between heroism and obsession. But plot is almost secondary to the experience of watching endless desert horizons, shimmering heat, and sandstorms become character themselves. Freddie Young's cinematography won the Oscar and changed how people thought about shooting landscapes. The deep shadows and brilliant highlights reveal golden sands beneath blue skies, so vivid they hurt. The film's dynamic movement and legendary editing, particularly that iconic match cut, still astonishes critics 70 years later. This is cinema as immersion, where you're transported into the raw, isolating beauty of the desert. Most people know it by reputation, rather than having actually sat through it. It's technically brilliant, but demands patience and ideally theatrical presentation. Critics call it a timeless masterclass in visual storytelling. Every generation rediscovers Lawrence of Arabia and recognizes it as the template for how to shoot landscapes on film. 2001, A Space Odyssey. 1968. Stanley Kubrick made a meditation on human evolution and existence in 1968 that still looks more advanced than films made yesterday. Roughly half of 2001 contains no dialogue, which means the entire narrative relies on pure visual language. Cinematographer Jeffrey Unsworth blended sterile spacecraft interiors with vast cosmic vistas, creating a visual language for space exploration that influenced every sci-fi film afterward. The trippy Stargate sequence became instantly legendary. The monolith shots became iconic. Every frame is composed with mathematical precision. The film traces humanity's journey from prehistoric apes to space explorers through visual storytelling, so ambitious it can still confuse audiences. But what makes it essential for this list is that the visuals alone justify its existence. The technical ingenuity was pioneering, the special effects genuinely innovative, but it's the cinematography that solidifies its place as foundational cinema. Critics immediately recognized it as a masterpiece, yet most casual viewers avoid it because of its deliberate pacing and abstract narrative. The film set the visual standard for how humanity imagines space, and 55 years later, nothing has surpassed its coolness or mystery. It's essential viewing for understanding how cinematography can replace dialogue completely. The Mirror, 1975. Andrei Tarkovsky created something that shouldn't exist in 1975. The Mirror is essentially a film poem, a fragmented exploration of memory and Soviet history, told through a collage of actual archival footage, literary readings, and original cinematography. It follows an unnamed man on his deathbed reviewing his life, and it barely functions as traditional narrative. But cinematically, it's transcendent. Tarkovsky's use of long shots and experimental montage creates a hypnotic, raw, elegant experience. The cinematography achieves something almost spiritual. What makes The Mirror essential is that it proves cinematography doesn't require conventional story structure. The visuals create meaning through feeling rather than logic. Tarkovsky shoots landscape like it holds spiritual significance. He uses natural light in ways that suggest the passage of time itself. The experimental approach combines documentary footage with poetic visual sequences, creating something that's almost impossible to categorize. Most audiences run screaming from this film. It's patient to the point of requiring pure surrender. But critics who connect with it call it one of the greatest films ever made. It's the ultimate hidden gem, barely known outside serious cinephile circles, yet represents the absolute peak of cinematography as philosophical expression. Watching it is meditation, not entertainment.